vain externalities, except I have to dwell on this. She just won an Emmy last night. That's my mother. And it's not just, oh, she helped out on an important project. She won as a narrator presenter. So you are in the presence of regional greatness. So what I thought what she won for was, as many of you know, the series of shorts she does about P.T. Barnum, which is how she began, maybe not as you began as an expert, but it's how this book sort of began.
It is, actually.
So I thought, for those who need a little tiny bit of P.T. Barnum, what's the word I want to say? Remedial education on P.T. Barnum as a nutmegger. Say a few things about that, if you don't mind, and then lead us into how we got to where we are.
And I'll actually say shout out to John Swing, who's sitting right there, who's the assistant director at the Barnum Museum, which generously platforms the video series that won the Emmy Award. So yeah, P.T. Barnum was my road in. And originally this was going to be a book about P.T. Barnum. But for a number of reasons, including exciting ones like publishing book scan figures and market dynamics, and less exciting ones, it just kind of wasn't really where the story was heading. And I was able to take the Barnum work into this wonderful public history. Thank you, Hugh Jackman.
Oh, right.
Because The Greatest Showman ignited all of this interest in P.T. Barnum, and a lot of no one thought the movie was going to do well, and it ended up making.
Is that right? 5 years ago? I'm embarrassed to say I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really entertaining. The music's great. It's showy. It's flashy. It has no historical. So as long as you can separate those things in your mind, you're good. But that was an opening to kind of really talk about Barnum for audiences that had seen the movie and wanted to know more. And who was this guy? And for me, especially because Barnum was born in 1810 and died in 1891, he spans almost the entire century. And it was such a time of growing pains, which is something I get into.
Yeah, huge. The best, if you want to write a biography of somebody, it seemed like a good idea because you would cover most of one of the most crucial centuries in the United States.
And especially here in Connecticut, where born in 1810, we are still a very theocratic Puritan state. Circus is basically illegal. There was actually an 18th century law in Connecticut that prohibited circus,
and that lasted
frivolity and acts of juggling.
It lasted what until the Civil War era?
Well, and at that point, juggling was
jugglers.
this catch-all word that kind of meant anything from actual juggling to sleight of hand to, and it was really directed at
just moral turpitude.
And
it's still that way.
It's the good stuff.
Yeah.
So, but that's what Barnum grew up in, was this very restrictive, very kind of Connecticut Yankee sort of culture. And then you think at the end of his life, where it's the Gilded Age, and we have,
and he helped usher it in. He helped usher it in.
Massively expanding nation, and he, I think, was pivotal because he understood mass media so well.
He understood what gilding the lily was. That was his job.
Yeah. And especially in that early 1800s, everyone's thinking about individualism and how they can kind of stretch their mind and their experience.
And apparently not good enough for his own book. So, so how did you move over to this far more I sort of have to say, richer, because I had read this book. My name is on the back because I endorsed it so heartily. But I was rereading it for today, and boy, I don't think I had read it for content really quickly. I don't know if some of you sure read The Husband, The Mother, first readers, the executive director. But that it's full. It is like a rich cornucopia. Every single paragraph has fabulous details and great explanations that really come together beautifully.
Thank you. But so it was looking at Barnum and then realizing there were all of these people and performances around him that I was actually almost even more interested in. And because Debbie's written multiple books that are deeply, deeply researched, you start following any one of those people or those threads, and it's very, very rich. The challenge, and I think the ultimate reward of looking at all these women, was there's not always a lot in the primary source record. There's not necessarily a lot there. You have to get lucky in terms of somebody deciding to write something down. And especially with circus, you don't always know what to trust. Because a lot of what survives was written by publicity agents. So even if something's written as a biography, okay, well, whose biography? And is it supposed to be something that's fun to read by the fireplace after you went home?
And in fact, you can almost be sure it's probably not true if in fact, okay, so one thing I have noticed about almost all female performers, when they say they were raised in a convent school, that probably just means that they got a little, as they went to soup school and they got a little education at Catholic
Or
parochial
It
school.
was, origin stories was
Right.
choose your own.
Right,
It was
right.
like, it's like
They
you
were
read-
not all Southern belles who
But-
somehow.
I think of, you read the old hagiographies of the saints, and it's okay, there's
Right.
formula here where, and the circus was fabulous at remaking anonymous people into something that everybody could aspire to.
So okay, so I don't know how much you know this group better, so some people will know a little bit about the circus, because one of the things I love, this first chapter is just a terrific, building the 19th century big top is fabulous. I'm wondering if you could just say a bit about, we live in a time of entertainment 24 hours a day. And it's not usually live. It's almost always in our pocket, sitting, here at home. It's the exact opposite of what going to the circus was, but at the same time, it has many continuities. Could you say a bit about what the circus meant in that time? And then I want to talk a little bit about, if we can, the way
Yes,
women.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the circus was the dominant entertainment throughout the 19th century.
That was not church rule. That was not, church wasn't that.
Well, and I was
Sorry.
after the Civil War, because there was circus going back to, I mean, day one. There are letters in which George Washington, we have correspondence where he was writing to a friend and said, Martha's homesick, she's got a cold, but I will absolutely meet you at the circus tonight.
And so what was he seeing?
He was seeing in Philadelphia a man named John Bill Ricketts, who was the first established circus promoter in the United States. And he came over because there was a model in England where people who taught horseback riding during the day would decide either to blow off some steam or make some extra money, and they would charge admission to come see some trick riding.
Is that separate from horse racing? Separate
Yes.
thing,
Yeah,
just that you wouldn't have seen the two going together.
not necessarily.
Would you?
So, although by the time you get to the big tented circus, they start to have hippodrome tracks around the show.
So it was entirely a separate thing. It was something.
And it kind of grew organically, where people are coming to see some trick riding, and well, maybe we should add a clown or a tightrope walker and jazz things up a little bit, and it kind of just grows from there.
Was tightrope walking just something that people just did as a, I don't know, amusement?
I mean, most of the entertainments we think of as circus entertainments are centuries, if not millennia old. It's the fact that they become commercial at this point and packaged, and people are paying.
And are you always traveling in those early times, or is it like a county fair equivalent?
I mean, fairs are a big ingredient in kind of, I would say, fairs, menageries. You kind of get all of these different ingredients that start to weave together. And menageries are big because circuses may be idle, immoral, terrible places, but animals, those are in the Bible. So you can come see Daniel in the Lion's Den. You can see.
I've never seen before.
And it's also natural history. So these all start to come together. And then in the 1820s, somebody says we should put this on the.
Because then you have are they moving around at that time, like a traveling theater?
Yeah, they're moving around. Small companies, but when you start having a tent, it's okay. Almost anywhere can be a venue. And it grows and grows and grows. After the Civil War, you get people like Barnum, Forepaugh, the Ringlings, and here, audience poll, and John doesn't get to answer. How old do you think P.T. Barnum was when he got into the circus business?
4.
Oh, close.
Really? No. So I was gonna say I thought it was rather old.
Yeah, he was in the 60s.
All right.
So it was basically a retirement project where he'd already had a career. He made his American Museum, toured Jenny Lind as a singer, had made and lost and made his fortune again.
So he understood mass entertainment.
Absolutely.
The idea of bringing a lot of people together in some pretty populated areas to spend money on something and then live along.
But when he gets to the circus, it's because of his name recognition, where some circus
As a promoter.
entrepreneurs come to him and go, "Look, we've got this business. Can we put your brand on it and get you as a partner to kind of be?"
At this point, you've got the railroads, right?
Railroad, transcontinental railroad's a big deal, and the circus invents flat cars.
You mean like things you mean just they're just
So
flat?
at first, being a railroad circus was kind of a dig, because it meant that like
you couldn't afford horses.
well, yeah, honestly, yeah, but it was also dangerous to move animals and equipment on and off of train cars. So the big shows in the late 1800s invent these flat cars where you could just roll things right up and down. And by World War I, you've got both the American and German armies watching circuses in Europe to figure out how to move men and equipment quickly. Because circuses are so good at logistics. If you can arrive, set up a show, perform 2 shows, and be gone within 24 hours, we want to know how you did it.
So do you also have the equivalent of modern day carnivals, games of chance, fortune tellers, that sort of thing?
That does tend to be a little bit separate. And even now, if you talk to circus and carnival people and confuse them,
They don't care for it.
people get a little snippy. But
Do they both look down at each other, or one is there a
no, I don't
clear
but
status?
it's a little different. But the book does cover, I'm pointing and it's not there.
That's right.
Allied arts, I call them, which is like, yes, there's a circus, but there's a lot of other art forms that kind of go with it naturally. And
Mhm.
like menagerie or magicians or sideshows or things that kind of make sense as the circus starts to become this entertainment campus.
So then let us move on to the ladies.
So ladies.
They were not always ladies, although they ought to be treated. One of my favorite. So one of the first you start with. So actually, what I'd like to ask is categories of female performers.
Is this like
because
Jeopardy?
because I was going
I'll
through.
take circus
Well,
ladies.
first of all, when I was writing the blurb, I was like, "Ooh, it was so much fun to list all the cat." I see none of those made the back, but I was like, I listed all the various
character limit, yeah,
character
right.
limit, right, exactly. But they did so many things, and of course, women were allowed to do so few things outside of the world of entertainment.
So, and that's a lot of what the book is about, is the idea that in this growth century where entertainment is becoming an industry, you've also got a society that's talking about the idea that women should be a certain way. Now, does it mean that everybody was? No. But there were some very loud voices talking about how women should be moral, upstanding, confined to the home, shining up the family for
the angel of the house.
the angel of the house, who
Right.
Virginia Woolf did not like. And these women who found different ways into circus performance, they were traveling, they were making their own money, they married or didn't marry. Many of them were extremely educated and accomplished.
So how are most of these? So give us some examples, and give us some of the categories, because one of the things I was impressed by was how many, of course, were equestrians, doing all kinds of incredible things. Aerialists also incredibly, both of them incredibly dangerous, but some of them more on the sexy. I mean, it's clear that sexiness and is also.
I mean, that's part of the
Right
push and pull
edge.
of the circus itself, is that especially as you get to, like, the Ringling Brothers were nicknamed a Sunday school show because the idea was you could take your family. It was upstanding, good, clean entertainment.
Okay.
But you're going to see women in tiny outfits and spangly tights. So
Tights.
there's always this push and pull.
It's very hard to overestimate how dangerous types were at the time, right?
But yeah, you've got
Legs.
the equestrians, that's really where circus comes from, and that's I think like the most respectable, like your highest
So skill-based.
but like if you're kind of looking at the hierarchy of the circus, your aerialists and your equestrians are kind of your high class athletes. And there's some women in there that did that. Although one of the chapters about Amy the Human Fly, who did perform in New Haven. And I went on a sidetrack and figured out that there was a dime museum where the wine thief is now on Sound Street.
Yeah. Have you written about that? Because one other thing she also does, she's a columnist for JSTOR, a fabulous, it's an
Research
aggregate, it's an
resource, yeah.
aggregate resource. Have you written about that?
Not, that was actually, it was part of kind of
I got time.
cut for
Busy,
time.
busy. Yeah.
But Amy the Human Fly was an aerialist, you know, very respectable act. But what I found while researching them for this book was she and her sister had this very tabloid sort of lifestyle where there was confusion about, were they even sisters? Did she like the other one's husband? One of them allegedly had a drinking problem and was arrested in New York City at 2 a.m. because somebody's boyfriend didn't like somebody else's boyfriend. So it's kind of piercing this idea of everything being.
They get to be celebrities, real life, true life celebrities.
Yes.
So did you have favorites?
It's hard. It's like, how to pick. I love Millie-Christine McKoy.
So please tell me that.
So there's a whole chapter on Millie-Christine, who was born into enslavement and eventually emancipated, ended up touring the world, spoke 5 languages, met Queen Victoria, and controlled her own career so well that she bought the land that she grew up on for her family.
Wow. Oh.
But it was interesting to see how she grew up and then how she took control of her career, and that she was marketed as, I mean, was basically being
Yeah, what was
shown-
her
So,
act or?
She was a pair of conjoined twins, and she actually preferred to be called she. There was an interview where a reporter noted,
It should with male and female characteristics. as
no,
conjoined
two
twins?
sisters,
Oh, okay.
and they were joined
Oh, she preferred to be she as in
a single.
a single.
So it was not they, it was she.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
she understood herself as a collective being,
mhm, mhm.
which I thought was really cool. But as a child, she was exhibited as a curiosity. And it was usually, this is another thing that comes out with a lot of these women, it was very racialized
Mhm.
because she was African American. And there was a whole story where she was kidnapped and brought to England, and then 2 showmen who were exhibiting her got into a fight, and one of them kidnapped her again. And then they sent a Scottish gang after her. I mean, this is why I love researching the story.
Mhm.
This up. But after emancipation, she decided, you know what, I'm going to go on the road. She was not a sideshow act, which is, I think, one of the things that's really interesting. It was not, look at this unusual body.
Yeah, I was gonna ask
She
how would you
would
perform?
sing, she would tell stories about travel, and obviously, you know, the fact of being conjunctive was a big draw. But when she joined John Doris's circus, after touring for a while, she wasn't sure she wanted to. And so she said, yeah, I'm gonna basically throw out a salary number that's so high that it's a polite way of showing this guy the door. And she said, I want $25,000 for the season,
Wow,
and he paid her.
wow. And that was enough because that was a draw. That was a big draw. So how would people know what you were gonna see? How would, if you knew, basically people are they're traveling either through wagons or through trains. How would I know I want to go see that? Look,
So
I wanna go see-
by the height of the circus, when this is, you know, Circus Day rolls around once a year, and you know, schools
Is it
closed,
usually the
business
same
is
time?
closed.
Are they working the same circuit every
Not
year?
necessarily, and those, by the second half of the 1800s, there's a fair number of shows that are competing, but they usually try to route so that they weren't really directly.
Mhm, mhm.
But you'd have an advanced squad that would go ahead with posters and couriers, and when I say posters, tens of thousands.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, entire barn sides would be wallpaper.
Am I correct that circuses are really the biggest forerunner of modern advertising? That's
Oh,
it.
absolutely, and in fact, lawyer hat on. the
Yes,
Supreme-
also she does that too.
There's a Supreme Court case called Donaldson, that was the first case to establish commercial copyright in the United States, and it's because of circus posters.
That's cool.
Because somebody said, you know,
You
this is
should be copying my lion.
Well,
right?
basically somebody wanted to printer A and went, I'm gonna take the plates and get them printed by printer B. And there was a
That's
fight,
okay.
and somebody said, this is just trash advertising, you don't get to claim ownership rights.
Mhm.
And this rule, there was enough art and originality that these were really artistic products.
Am I correct also that Billboard magazine, which maybe you've all heard of Billboard as the people who keep track of music and entertainment, that comes from circus, right?
Absolutely.
That was
Yeah.
originally a circus magazine.
Billboard and the New York Clipper were kind of like the trade papers,
Right.
and people were. I love the Clipper because you just go through the classifieds and you've got snake charmers seeking work for the upcoming season, has owned snakes.
Although that is how we get into my world of prostitution, because there's a lot of well, I don't know how many of them advertise as snake charmers, but once you're on the snake charming route, it's a slippery slope down, is all I can say. Well, sorry. Other favorites that are you have magicians in here. You have tightrope walkers.
Tightrope
Tightrope walker. Which is the hardest?
like the hardest act.
Yeah, what is the hardest act?
I think anyone who does circus, it's like anything else where some people like this one, some people like this one. And it then you also do get, is it skill based or is it something like a bearded lady or someone like Millie-Christine where the fact of their existence is what's supposed to be interesting or a draw. I mean, one of the things I love, and I was so glad we were able to put photographs in the book.
Yeah, the photographs are fabulous in here.
But that this is a time where we actually have photographs.
They're
And
probably
I
a
think that
very
just-
early
It
use.
so humanizes
Yeah.
everyone. But to your point about advertising, though, a lot of the reason we have these photos is people would sell them.
Yeah.
And in fact, Yale has this great collection of carte de visite photos by Matthew Brady, who was a Civil War photographer, because he was across the street from Barnum's American Museum. So everyone would go get their portraits taken so that they could have merchandise.
Right.
But we have all these beautiful photos of giants and bearded ladies and Circassian women.
And I'm sure the photographers loved having that because it was an advertising for them.
Yeah.
All this new for like that.
It's unusual.
Is there anything you really disapproved of? I mean, it's not the cleanest world, and I don't mean in any kind of way. It's not the cleanest world.
Well, I mean, I think the thing that comes across strongest and that I actually like is circus is this dream space where you kind of go into the tent and it's fun time and people fly and unusual things happen. But the outside world is what informs, and so often you see how the circus was reflecting a lot of really problematic stereotypes or biases, or even how
Like vaudeville, or
how the
like-
performers, especially women, were treated.
Did you see minstrelsy mixing into music? How much was music part of what was going on?
Minstrelsy, and I mean, that's definitely, especially Barnum, kind of his early story, you get into that. That does kind of weave in and out of the circus a little bit. But I'd say that's a little more kind of dime museums and theatricals and that sort of thing.
So what was the essence of what you were doing? If you were going to a museum, if you were going to the circus as opposed to something else, what were you really going for? But just
I mean, especially like again, these huge, greatest show on earth.
Okay.
I think that's it. It's the spectacle. You want a 3-ring spectacle to see something you've never seen before.
and the excitement and the crowd and the
And it becomes kind of a cultural shorthand where like we all know if I say circus, you've kind of got a picture in your head and there's popcorn and
you have actually been to a circus.
it's a little good question. Yeah.
Wow, well,
Yeah.
it is circus friendly. And I'm not gonna say you guys are old, but I'm gonna say this. I bet if we had would your daughter's age, would they have anything? She's sorry, 7th grader. Would she say, yeah, we've all been, well, she has.
I think circus has migrated into other entertainment areas. Like the tented circus may not be what it was. You don't take a day off school to go to the big top.
Let alone run away from home.
But-
So,
Have people seen Circus Away? Is reality television about people with unusual bodies a thing? Weird videos on TikTok? This kind of curiosity culture is absolutely.
So the difference between circus culture and curiosity culture specifically is the liveness, yes? Or is it, or would you say that's not fair? Because from my experience in seeing the circus and circus, we are a big fan of the Aerial. Sorry, what is the name of it's the Aerial Studio, the Air Temple Arts, which New Haven has its
Its
own
own
crappy
school.
school because that's just how cool we are. And should we be juggling books later? That won't be I won't be responsible for that. But the liveness, the sense you're seeing somebody doing something very dangerous, very difficult, right in front of you. I asked somebody once about what's interesting about NASCAR. Because NASCAR is just
Love
going
it.
around in circles. And they said, well, the carnival culture of it. And I was like, I'm all in favor of that. I get that. But you could get
But
that
that's, like,
anywhere. That's just
experiential.
that, yeah. And I was like, okay, I get that. But they were like, well, you could do that anywhere, right? I can do that at the county fair. What's the difference? They were so, it's that you never know when somebody's gonna crash. And I was like, ouch, but
Well,
that is, I can see that.
yeah.
And so that might be here, right?
Well, there's a chapter at the end on lion tamers and lion queens, especially the women. Because the men, it was you
There's a
you are taming the fierce beast.
Right.
It's proof of your control and your dominion. But with women, openly, there's press accounts where people are just going, this might be the night that she could just be. I mean, we're not talking like this is like the New York Times.
Right, of course, it's good. And she's a snack.
And the
Right,
idea there was that if she gets away without being eaten, it's because pure sentimentality has tamed.
Or, the
Taste the
mystical,
savage
that's right,
beast.
that's right, that's right. So, what does it mean now for today? Like, are we hungry for this? Are we totally entertained to death by other things? Can you see a time where this ever becomes, if not, again, it'll never be the dominant strain, of course, we live in an attenuated digital culture, but could it come back in a bigger way?
I think there's more of it around than people maybe realize. And in fact, I think a lot of small circuses, and more than you think are touring, but that's where a lot of, I think, some of the best shows are.
Las Vegas has several shows going at any given time.
But if anyone's seen the show Severance, Britt Lauer, who plays Kelly, had toured with the Shoestring Circus last season, which is a very small, maybe, dozen people tented show in the Pacific Northwest. But there are a lot of those small, the Flip Circus, which is part of the Vasquez company, set up shop in West Farms Mall in the last year. Like there are a lot of small shows that are doing really great work. And I think it actually kind of pokes a little bit at that kind of always on, always short attention span. Like you're in a tent and there's a live band and something cool happening. And it actually kind of tempts you to stretch that to be present.
To be present.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Let's, if I might, I'm filled with questions, but it might be better to talk with people. Questions and thoughts. So you're writing notes, sir.
Many notes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna go back to one of the early things and just to ask, especially given the company we have here, convent schools. So you said that the performers are sometimes described as having gone to a convent school. And I was just curious, is that a way of somehow you're a circus
I would not
performer.
say that was especially common.
No, okay. I was just
Really?
that
Because
struck me.
in vaudeville, that is super common as
Well, I think that doesn't surprise me.
because how did this
Because
pretty
vaudeville,
young
it's a little
thing?
saucy.
Yes, exactly. I'm sorry. So go ahead.
Well, I was just wondering if it has a different intention. It was a way of excusing people saying, yeah, but they're Catholic, so.
Well,
That was not what
in the
I was saying.
circus, like vaudeville, yes. In the circus, it was actually more the opposite, that press agents were very careful to say, yes, that lady might be up on a tightrope in very skimpy clothing, but you know what? She does all of her laundry very meticulously on the back lot. And in the off season, she is a devoted wife and mother.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
So it was meant to be complimentary or.
Yeah, the circus worked hard to keep the family friendly.
Think of it a domestic quality, whereas for the performers, the female performers involved, they were all supposed to be ingenues more or less. And so, no matter where they came from, they had to have, maybe they'd also possibly run away from being a Southern, the Lee family, and decided, almost never. It's very rare that anyone would go into performance who wasn't from a very poor or difficult background.
I mean, in the circus, you do get the fact that people come from multi-generational performing families where people are staying in the business.
And you see that somewhat in vaudeville and Broadway, but not the same.
Where, yeah, people were kind of picking it up, but they're,
The more physical it is, the more likely it is.
well, and again, those are in those kind of the aerialists, the
The
equestrian, the
tumblers.
kind of higher
Right.
class, somebody who's maybe unusual physically or unusually talented is more likely to kind of.
Like someone like not Harold Lloyd, who's Buster Keaton, is famous for having grown up as a child gymnast and being thrown at the age of 3 around the vaudeville
Very
stage.
common, by the way, like people you wouldn't expect have circus backgrounds, like Burt Lancaster of all people, like his own circus stunts.
And isn't that true of old Archie Leach? Didn't Cary Grant didn't he?
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry. So I didn't mean to get it off on the racy thing about how
Okay.
there must have been some prostitution. I mean, everyone knew that was one of the reasons you didn't like having the circus come to town because God only knows.
With the
And that-
circus, it was more pickpocketing and drinking and fighting. Because
Pocketing, but
a traveling show comes into town and it's gonna draw the unsavory element.
right, exactly. The people who are going to move along because they will.
Barnum, though, with the American Museum had to deal with the theater issue because theater, you've got the third tier where
That's
people are basically openly assuming it's.
Right, that they're going to pick up women up there or
So he
or
had-
whatever.
He had the moral lecture hall where not only was it upstanding, he was a temperance advocate. He went sober in his
Yeah,
40s,
right,
so
right,
there
right,
was no
right.
booze either.
Right. So most circuses, did they have booze available that was besides?
Honestly, no. I mean,
Right.
the Ringlings, Barnum, like the idea was you were trying to make it family friendly as much as.
Well, also you didn't want to be run out of town. You had to have the town elders at least give you some kind of task.
Well, and also just logistically,
Right.
they ran a really tight ship in terms of bringing in food, concessions, supplies.
Oh, that's interesting.
Although
would
there's
they
the
carry
old
along-
story.
Would they carry along the equivalent of their own food concessions?
So you'd send crews up ahead because, and there's entire like MBA program case studies on this.
So interesting.
You don't want to carry something that you have to either worry about it spoiling,
Yeah,
or so they
yeah.
would send procurement agents up ahead who would go to the next town and go, I need 4 sides of beef and 100 pies and, and get it arriving because the shows, they'd start setting up at.
Did they sell? Did they do the equivalent of selling popcorn?
Yeah.
So they have their own ability to
Popcorn,
do that.
barber pole candy, you know the story about pink lemonade?
Yes, I do, but
So,
garble it.
take this as you will, but the idea was in the 1860s, somebody said that the lemonade vendor ran out of water. And it was a really hot day. So he went running down the back lot looking for water and grabbed somebody's wash tub, but it was allegedly a tub in which one of the equestrians had just washed her red tights. And that they made lemonade with it, called it pink lemonade, and
Sold
like
much
gangbusters.
more, sold
Yes.
much more, yeah. It is the best stocking related
But
story.
to
in
answer your
our
question though about the women, the other thing you get is people like Lavinia Warren or
who is Mrs. Tom Thumb.
Mrs. Thompson.
I
who
thought
had-
she was impressive.
I love her.
Yeah.
But who had kind of appropriate occupations where she was a school teacher before she got into the entertainment business, because as a young woman, being a school teacher was acceptable and appropriate. But I loved her. She was a fashion plate. She was an influencer.
Right. She was like a tiny little doll who could be moved to go
Well,
around.
and there
the
are
town.
the Barnum Museum has actual paper dolls that were merchandised at the time where you could buy them and dress her in like different gowns.
Would it be appropriate to ask a little bit about the Barnum Museum, because we are all Connecticuters, and I know you guys have suffered great strains from damage. Was it Hurricane Sandy and
It was
some other
a
places?
trifecta. It was Sandy, and there were 2 storms and a tornado.
Oh, well,
Um,
that's
A tornado in downtown Bridgeport was, but the building just this over the past year has finished restoration work on the outdoor, the exterior structure, and was granted national landmark status as well. But it's still an uphill battle just in terms of
There was
fundraising.
never an endowment for this. This was purchased.
No, and it was usually museums do this kind of fundraising while they're in business and operating. I mean, the good news is only one item from the collection was lost despite everything that went on with the storms. And when I say the windows were blown out and all kinds of wind and water was sucked in, but everything, one book was unable to be sold, but everything else was
Wow.
okay. But that took time.
Yeah.
So right now it's fundraising and looking ahead to what the future and the envision of the museum would be. But that's part of why we have the YouTube channel is
It makes people care. Yeah.
but and with the Greatest Showman ideally headed to Broadway, you know, there's only gonna be more attention, I think.
Especially if Hugh Jackman keeps misbehaving with his new wife. Other questions that can or may or may not have to do with Hugh Jackman.
If you had to choose, what do you think the best surviving example, specifically American circus tradition is? Like not circus.
Something,
as
you
an art,
mean something
but-
that's still going on?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
something that's still going on, or something that's really carrying on the sort of traditional and specifically American.
Okay, you
circus.
ready?
Yeah.
Disney World.
I'm not surprised to hear that. That's so super.
There are parades.
Yeah,
If you think of
Every
Main
day.
Street USA, it's the Gilded Age town that
Yeah.
always is and never was.
Mhm.
You can go ride on Dumbo the Flying Elephant. If you go to Disneyland, the Casey Jr. ride actually has circus wagons. And the original Tinkerbell that Walt Disney hired was Tiny Klein, who was a circus acrobat and Iron Jaw performer. And she performed as Tinkerbell into her 70s.
Wow.
And actually, if you look her up, there's a YouTube, somebody digitized a video of her doing an Iron Jaw zip line over Times Square. But Disney World, it's the idea, like, there's actually a quote where P.T. Barnum said what he wanted people to experience was amusement and education. And
Yeah.
Walt Disney said the same thing.
What do you know if you were, was explicitly inspired by the circus? It must have been to some extent.
Yes, Disneyland opened with a circus in 1955. And Walt Disney bought something like 20 circus wagons, like actual, like the parade
Wow.
wagons. And had his like the Disney Works restored them all because it was going to be part of this circus, which was to promote the Mickey Mouse Club show.
Yeah.
Because basically, you're too young. He sold ABC the Mickey Mouse Club so they would give him the money to build this. So they promoted the TV show. The circus lasted for 6 weeks. A llama got loose and ran down Main Street. And one of the aerialists had a little bit of a wardrobe malfunction. It was not Disney.
Was that Disney Red?
But if you go to Disney World and you go to the ranch, at the Fort Wilderness Hotel, they actually still have one wagon.
How do you handle the questions about animals?
I think a lot of people in Europe led America in this. Most people in most shows have moved on from animal performance. And there's a lot of really cool things that can be done, puppetry, or other things. Or honestly, a lot of shows are still working with domestic animals, whether it's dogs or horses or pigs. I think a lot of people agree at this point that exotic animals, it's challenging and difficult, but you have a lot of really old school circus fans who were kind of like, if it doesn't have an elephant, it's not a circus. And it's tough because, you know, I think it's probably a good thing that we moved away from it, but at the same time, I rode an elephant at Circus World. It was really cool.
Most people that would have been your only way to ever know about this.
Yeah.
Most places didn't have zoos or you would never have videos or anything, huh? Any questions?
Question about the clowns.
They're creepy.
All I can, the link I see is Clown College in Sarasota with the circus. When did women get into it? Or did they?
Yes, there's a woman named Lulu at the turn of the century who there are posters of her as a clown. It's mostly men.
Yeah.
There are, isolated women here and there. Peggy Williams, who is in Sarasota, got into clown college and
Could you explain what Sarasota is?
Sarasota, Florida is like Circus Central. It was the winter quarters for the Ringlings for many, many years, and the Ringling Museum is still there on that site. But they had clown college up until the mid-90s or so, which is like, they closed when I was applying to colleges, so.
Yeah, tried to get you.
There are women who have been clowns, like big differential. And also the European clowning tradition is very different to the American. It's a little more theatrical. It's not
Like
as much.
the pantaloon tradition?
It comes from Canada,
Uh-huh.
but it's a little more theatrical. Like if you've seen a Cirque du Soleil show, that's a little more of the European.
Oh, you mean
tradition.
as opposed to pratfall humorous?
Yeah, and like the white face and the
Mhm,
ghost.
mhm. When do we start to see clowning come of that, of the American tradition?
The American tradition, clowns were actually very early, and originally they spoke.
Hmm.
It was not, and in fact, I think of them as like late night hosts, where the idea was the ringmaster was representing authority and the clown was there to poke at it.
That's
Just-
interesting.
Just,
And,
Yeah.
but a lot of times they would tell especially political jokes. And Dan Rice was probably the most famous, who's allegedly the model for Uncle Sam, because he would have this stupid cat.
Yeah.
But the clowns, it was more, they were just kind of a gadfly there to
Like
make
a
people
tumbler
laugh.
kind of, or a
and-
jester. Yeah.
But then it starts to become more of this like white face pantomime later on.
When do we get the clown car?
Oh, I have gotten into the clown.
I have no
Mhm.
doubt. And you have to figure an answer.
It's tiny. It's tiny.
Oh, you mean, I thought you meant as a researcher.
Oh, no,
Sorry,
like,
that you
at the Ringling,
like,
they
you
have the car
actually
and
have
you-
gotten into the clown car. How many people can you fit in that clown car?
I thought it was trim with just me, so. Yeah. No, but clowns, it comes from like the Canadian, and well, and then you get like the early clowns where they actually have the slapstick, where they're like, you know,
We have a slapstick.
yeah, it's a,
How could I not have realized
it's a
that? Of
wood,
course,
it looks like
an
a cricket
actual
bat, it's got a
slapstick.
hinge with a little extra piece of wood, so that when you go like this, so on stage.
Was this in the book and I just didn't know?
No, because it
Okay, because I was.
didn't fit. But sometime in the like, I would say mid-century, mid-20th century, clowns start to be scary.
yeah,
And it's because of like Todd Browning and
I'm sorry, I don't know Todd Brown.
Freaks, the movie in the
Oh,
30s.
oh, yes.
And then, you know, I think as by
The
the time you get to like,
King thing or the.
yeah, and Dominic Gacy and all that, and like by the 70s, everyone's like, it's creepy.
Will it ever be renewed, do you think, as an American tradition?
There was a New York Times story within the past couple months about younger
Oh,
generation of
Clown girls?
Yes, clown girls.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
And also there was a weird fashion trend around the pandemic called clowncore,
yes,
where dopamine dressing, where everyone was bored and tired of being stuck at home. So you're just going to wear some really colorful, weird, clownish things.
for a while, some seminaries were teaching courses on clown myths. Believe it or not.
makes sense.
Yes,
There
I
are,
think YDS, the other day, so might have had a visiting professor.
there is I was going to say, there's at least one priest I've met who is a circus chaplain.
Woo, wow.
Yeah.
Before we're moving towards the end of the hour, but would anyone, any other questions?
You in the back.
Curious, what was cut that you wish
Did
was
it-
still in the book?
Said she wanted to talk about that, I forgot.
Yeah, so there were a few things that didn't make it in. There was one woman named Adelaide Herman I wanted to talk about, and she really just didn't fit because ultimately she's a magician and not a circus performer. But her husband was a very famous performing stage magician, and after he died, she took over the act. And she was so talented, but she decided to kind of prove her chops in her first performance by doing the bullet catch.
What's the bullet catch?
There are many ways to do it, but it's you stand on that end of the stage and somebody with a gun stands on that end of the stage and they fire it, and it either, you know, in some versions somebody catches it in their teeth, some versions it's on a plate, or
I presume that's a
magician-
magic trick, not a actual skill trick.
it's more practical than you'd think. There's a book written about it called 12 Have Died.
You have to have a high tolerance for morbidity.
But she went right out and was like, I'm gonna do the bullet catch, and did it.
Oh, wow, wow. So that's your next project, I
That's
presume,
next.
and they don't call them magicians, so they call them what, illusionists. Yes, or do you feel that's not, that's putting on the
I feel
dog?
like that's like, what was it, Joe Blue? Like,
Yeah.
that was Arrested Development.
Yes,
An
right.
illusion.
Yeah.
No, I would love to actually look at Women in Magic next, because you get into this very interesting idea. Lulu Hurston here is kind of quasi active.
Alright, so last question, unless somebody else has one, so I could stay here all night. And that is a thing, so, the last
I
question,
got a quick one.
please.
So just thinking about all of this, Betsy, it's like circus. I'm thinking actually, because having mentioned P.T. Barnum, I'm thinking of my favorite comic strip growing up, Pogo, who had a character, P.T. Bridgeport.
Yes.
Mom from P.T.
That's
Barnum.
funny.
And I feel like Walt Kelly, who was from Bridgeport, felt like there was no easier way to conjure up 19th century America
Yes.
than the circus. So if a circus is a way of conjuring up 19th century America, do we still have something? How would you conjure up America now? The circus is a big idea.
Ooh, big question.
That's a huge question. I will say, and this is, I'm taking your question for slight left turn. I do take a little bit of offense whenever anyone looks around currently and says like, what a circus this is. Because it is genuinely an offense to circus people. Because circuses are highly organized,
Exactly.
tightly planned,
Yeah.
well-trained, inclusive.
Although I did just learn the phrase a few weeks ago, not my monkeys, not my circus, and I was like, wow, I want to use that more often.
Yeah,
And
what
that-
embodies the current moment. I mean, it's probably TikTok.
It's probably
like,
because it is an eternal variety show, an endless variety.
and the
show.
attention span and the
Right,
newness.
right.
Which
And
is what Barnum was trying to do. It was just, you had to, I mean, he released his autobiography in new editions every year, which I think of as like the slowest social media post ever. Because he must be like, well, here's what's new since last year. And yeah.
A last question. If you could be like really good at any of these things, what would it be? Which would it be? Which the amazing things.
Yeah, wow. See, I don't like heights, so I don't know that I'd want to tightrope, but I'm kind of.
But that's the
intrigued
one
by-
that's
I'm kind of
that's the
intrigued
queen
by-
of that's the queen of. Yes.
I mean, I juggle. I'd like to be better at juggling. How about that one?
I think we'd all like to be better at
Very
John.
good.
We will. Hi. Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you,
Thank
Betsy.
you, everyone
everybody.
here.